It's the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to take this opportunity to wish both you and this House a happy new year. Well, it looked like the national government had had an epiphany over summer, that they'd woken up to two things: that we had a youth unemployment problem and that we needed to invest some money into skills training and apprenticeships. But actually, after hearing the last contribution, it seems it was a very short-lived epiphany, because what we've had is a whole lot of backtracking from the Minister who has just spoken. She's told us about how, that those schemes exist. National's been doing it. She cited the wonderful example of Jobs Ops. Well, this was $5,000 as a subsidy to an employer to help people in. It was regarded as a reasonably successful program. One, it wasn't apprenticeship training, but it was a way of moving young people into work. So it was for this reason that we were greatly disappointed when in Budget 2012 the funding for this scheme was cut and it wasn't rolled over into the new financial year. So this was a policy that the Minister has got up and told us about tonight that was actually cut in last year's budget. Because there are two important things: that the epiphany, if it had actually been long-lived, would have been good. That yes, we do have a youth unemployment problem, and two, that we might need some people trained for rebuilding Christchurch and in our skills trades more generally. Because is there a youth unemployment problem? Well, obviously the Minister has spent the summer, rather than having an epiphany, trying to rejiggle the numbers to make it sound better. But let's actually look at what the state of employment in the future, if you're a young person in New Zealand in 2013, looks like. And it ain't that flash. If you're aged between 15 and 19 years of age at the end of last year, 25.5% of your cohort was unemployed. 1 in 4 of your cohort was not in work. This is not something to be proud of. This is not something to celebrate, and it's something that any member of this House, no matter their political hue, should be concerned about and committed to actually addressing. But it wasn't just for this very young age group, for the 15 to 19-year-olds. If you were aged between 20 and 24, 12.8% of you and your peers would not be able to find a job. These are not levels of unemployment that any of us can think are acceptable. These are young New Zealanders who are growing up without hope, and young New Zealanders who are getting on planes and leaving all the time. And then we have 13.4% of our young people, or 85,000 young New Zealanders, who are not in any form of work, education or training. And there is nothing done to address this. There has been nothing substantial done. Let's have a look at some of the measures that this government has put in place. I want to briefly have a look at the limited service volunteer scheme that was put in place. This is, of course, the great scheme where young people were going to go and do an intensive course with the military to train them up and hopefully get them back into the workforce. Well, what did happen to that? That's a very good question that I've been asked. At the end of the 2011 financial year, 40%, or 735 of the 1,828 people who had completed this course were still unemployed after 3 months. Don't think this is substantially addressing the very real problems we have in youth unemployment. But then, last year, the Prime Minister came up with a stunner. He came up with an absolutely stunning way to address the 25% unemployment we have in some age groups in youth unemployment, the 85,000 young New Zealanders not in work, educational training. He wrote to 175 businesses asking them to take on a limited service volunteer graduate. Did this work? Don't know. The Ministry of Social Development has informed me in answers to written questions they haven't collected any data on this. So we don't even know if this is. If there is data now being collected on that, we would welcome the chance to see what the uptake from those letters were. But then let's go back. Let's roll the clock back a bit to in April 2011, an election year. John Key rode into Christchurch on his white horse to CPIT and talked the talk on skills training and apprenticeships. He was going to offer sweeteners, as he said in April 2011, to get young people into trade training. Well, this failed. His Mr. Fix-It, Stephen Joyce, the man that's handling unemployment in this country at 7.3%, had came and told us that this was because there was lack of demand. John Key's sweeteners haven't worked. And what did we see last week when John Key rebooted the apprenticeship policy? When John Key had another crack at it? More talk of sweeteners. $1,000 or $2,000 if you're in a priority trade to help you buy some tools. Is this a sweetener? What would be a great idea is actually structurally looking at getting young people into apprenticeships. We support getting young people into apprenticeships, but what we see from members opposite is a squandered opportunity. The money was allocated in budget 2011 for training people to help with the rebuild of Christchurch, of Canterbury throughout our country. Until November last year, a good 18 months on, this government opposite had only managed to spend $8 million of the $42 million that was budgeted. They have squandered that opportunity. In that time, 657 young New Zealanders took up that opportunity. It's no wonder that we have members opposite stand and tell us today that skills hubs in Canterbury are about bringing in overseas workers to fill the gap because they have failed to train our young people. They have failed to give our young people this opportunity, and they need to own up to that. The 10,000 places that were announced last week is too little, too late, and it is only a drop in a bucket. It simply does not address the level of skills. If we actually had used the money when John Key announced it back in 2011, we'd have young people 18 months through their training. These would be people nearly ready to go on the job site and contribute, but no, instead what we're doing is we're going and we're seeking skilled migrants from all over the country. This is not acceptable. This is not a government that has been committed to doing anything. But in John Key's epiphany, he tells us that last week that there's a big opportunity over the next few years, particularly with the rebuilding of Christchurch, to train more New Zealanders in vocational careers will set them up well for their working life. And Mr. Joyce had similar sentiments. Well, actually, they've just rerun the press releases from April 2011. This was exactly the same rhetoric that was used then, and that they have squandered that opportunity. It is our hope that it actually will be put into place, that the sweeteners being offered may actually get young people into some of these training opportunities this time. And yes, we have been telling you in this time that we need to do something about this. Labor has consistently, since the 2010 earthquake in Christchurch, been telling the government that we need to address this. We've put up positive alternatives, but there are 20% fewer apprentices today than when National took office. Half a decade in, 5 years, what have they got? Their legacy? Fewer apprentices in this country. The money that they put back in last week into apprenticeship training, let's be quite honest, it's not even the equivalent of what they ripped out a couple of years ago from the training budgets. It just doesn't add up. So what will Labor do? Labor does have a positive alternative to tackle youth unemployment, and it is a positive alternative that we are rightly proud of, and that when we go around the country, when I talk to young people in my electorate of Wigram, and when my colleagues talk to young people in their electorates, there is a great deal of enthusiasm. We'll pay employers the equivalent of the dole to take on apprentices. We know that employers all around the country are crying out for some help to work with this. We'll back Kiwi businesses to be able to do this. We will work with councils on projects that support their provinces. We are going to be actively creating jobs. We're not going to sit back and wait for the magic of the market to do it, because we know that what is needed now and what New Zealand needs to address this crisis is an active government that's willing to roll up its sleeves and do something and not sit back and hope for the best. Because hope, and more hope has not led to positive outcomes for our young New Zealanders. I think it is an absolute travesty, the future that our young people face. And as David Shearer said earlier in his speech this afternoon, aspiration isn't a word we hear from members opposite anymore. They have no aspiration for young New Zealanders. I hope to see some movement on the real issue of youth unemployment this year.
I call Jonathan Young.
May I be the first to congratulate your opportunity to